This ESPN podcast is brought to you by Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance. Visit geico.com.
The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects. The BS Report. The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report, taping this on a Monday afternoon, so it's running on Tuesday. We have very few football traditions here on the BS Report, but one of them is to call our friend Matthew Berry and get his fantasy football advice that you're not already getting on 7 channels and his podcast and his column and all the other outlets he's on. But it's always special when he comes on here. This is one of his first places. How are you?
I'm good, Bill. How are you? It is. It's as the kids say, it's been a minute.
It has been a minute. Well, you disappeared. You gave up on fantasy baseball. You quit. You walked away.
I did.
How'd that feel?
Correct. Felt great, to be perfectly honest. Don't miss it at all. I mean, I'm playing in 4 leagues, which for me feels like nothing. You know what? It's not. I felt like, and I'm sure you can relate to this as well because you get stretched thin as well. I felt like because of having to do baseball and because football's become so huge and fantasy football's become so huge between, the combine and the draft and, free agency and everything like that, it's really a year-round sport. I have 5 kids now. I want to see them. And baseball lasts until obviously the end of September. So I could either do one of two things. I could half-ass a job on baseball, which I didn't want to do, or I could just walk away. I just felt like it's just, I don't think it is possible to do both sports really well from an analysis standpoint. I mean, you can play fantasy baseball, but in terms of writing columns and doing daily podcasts, I mean, I was doing 2 podcasts a day for like 2.5 months every year. So it was just It was just too much. It was just too much.
I hate fantasy baseball.
Team not going well?
This might be the year I'm out. Yeah, I mean, it was the kind of year where you have Addison Russell in an AL keeper league, and he just gets traded and just vanishes. And it's the kind of year where you trade Mike Trout for Jose Altuve and Manny Machado and Josh Hamilton, and then Machado blows out his knee like a day later. It's one of those years. You know those years where you have Tanaka on the Yankees, you're excited about him, and then all of a sudden he has like an ulnar nerve thing. Had like 7 of those.
Brutal. Although Altuve's been awesome. Altuve's had a huge year.
I know, but we're not keeping him. We made the trade to keep Machado. And then the other thing is our best prospect and the best prospect at our whole league is Byron Buxton, who had like the worst concussion in the history of baseball and is out for the year. So I feel like we're actually like tarnishing the people that are on our team. Like we've had all the Royals who are terrible. All of them. I think we've had every one of them. Like we're ruining the Royals just by drafting them. But let's talk about football. People want to know about football.
Everyone tuned into this podcast going, wait.
I just had the vent. I'm glad you guys
football.
said your event. Yeah, well, here we go.
Right.
First of all, weird draft time this year because you got Labor Day and then NFL. Maybe we've had other years like this, but it does feel like it's a little too early to have your draft now, but then it would get too late if you waited too close to the season. So when are your drafts?
I'm in the middle of them. I've done 2 so far. I have 6 to go. So I have 2 more tomorrow. Let's see. I have one Thursday night. I have one this weekend. I have one September 2nd, and then I have one that I'm doing by email. I think that's all of them. I don't know.
I have my first one tonight in the draft where you get voted out. So by the time people hear this, yeah. By the time people hear this podcast, I might not have a fantasy team. I haven't been voted out yet. I'm due. I wouldn't mind it either.
But I feel like we've had this conversation before. I feel like you have, and I don't know how much of it is don't throw me in the briar patch kind of stuff. But you have openly campaigned to be the guy voted out of this league before, and it's never come true.
I know. I'm going to Seth Meyers' Emmy party tonight, and I was taunting them, just vote me out. I'm going to get dressed for the party. I'll just stop by, vote me out. I'll go right to the party. I'm trying to reverse mind trick the whole process. It might work. Who knows?
It might work. Who else now? Because this league has come about. Like I know Cousin Sal's in the league, and he gave me a story about the league for my book. And I know John Hamm's in the league. Who else is in the league? Can you name drop a little bit? Who else is in this league?
Well, John Hamm has had a proxy for the last 5 years, ever since he got voted out. John Hamm got voted out and had to just drink his beer and leave. And since then he's at a proxy. I don't know if he totally liked being voted out since he's Don Draper.
See, to me, I feel like he should be voted out. If you don't show up, if you're sending a proxy, if you're pulling the movie star move there, you don't. I mean, come on.
Well, he's got the Emmys tonight. I mean, we're doing the draft against the Emmys. It would be weird if he didn't go to the Emmys because he had his fantasy football draft.
That is fair. All right, that's fair. John Hamm's off the hook.
Oh, and we have Mole from Windy City Heat is in our draft.
Okay.
For all the Windy City Heat fans out there. Yeah, that's about it. Dave Damashek.
Oh, sure. I know Dave. I've known Dave a long time.
Yeah. Kevin Hench. Running 2 shows
Hench
on ABC. Yeah, these are some very, very subtle name drops.
Yeah.
All right, fantasy football.
Yes, sir.
1, 2, 3 running backs you feel sure things, or 4?
I think there's 5.
5?
I think there are 5 running backs. My first 5 are running backs. In order, Adrian Peterson, LaShawn McCoy, Jamal Charles, Matt Forte, Eddie Lacy.
Oh, and Eddie Lacy has moved into the top 5.
Yeah, I think you can make an argument for any one of those guys at number 1. Lacy's probably the furthest stretch, but it would not shock me at the end of this year if Eddie Lacy were the number 1 running back in fantasy.
What is your reasoning?
He had a monster year. I mean, if you just look at what he did on a points per game basis once he came back, and I know people are saying oh, well, he did it without Aaron Rodgers. That's my impression, by the way, of people.
I like it.
Trashing Eddie Lacy. Fat Eddie Lacy. Remember how everyone was down on Eddie Lacy last year in the preseason because he's quote-unquote fat?
Yeah.
Yeah. Eddie Lacy is going to have a monster season in one of the highest, if not the highest scoring offenses. They want to take some pressure off Aaron Rodgers. They don't want Aaron Rodgers throwing the ball the whole time. They don't want Aaron Rodgers trying to scramble around when they get in close the way he has. They want to keep him healthy. This is an offense that's going to score a ton. He's a true 3-down back. You just look at it 5 touchdowns in the last 4 games. He's just a beast.
I think you need. You always give you tasks for your column. You like having little hooks and like fantasy kryptonite, things like that. I think you need to come up with a term for the 3-down back. And maybe it's just 3-down back, but it feels like there could be something better because it's same case for Matt Forte, right? He's always in the field, which makes him more valuable. And there's really not a lot of guys who are always on the field. I can only think of a couple off the top of my head. Who else is there?
Well, the first 5 guys I mentioned are true 3-down backs. And then there are other 3-down backs that they have other things that, make you squeamish. Arian Foster's a 3-down back, but you're concerned about, about all the injuries. I think Monte Ball is a 3-down back, but you might be concerned because he's a bit of a unknown. He hasn't proven it over a full season as the main guy. I'm a Monte Ball believer, though. I have him in the first round. So there are other guys like that. DeMarco Murray's a 3-down back. Doug Martin's a 3-down back. But there's just other things that, Murray with the injuries, Martin with the concerns in terms of Jeff Tedford's offense, and the Tampa Bay offensive line is so terrible. They're now saying stuff like, maybe Richie Incognito was misunderstood. Maybe we should talk to him.
I like it. I do feel like he was misunderstood.
Richie Incognito. That's how bad the line is in Tampa Bay these days.
I think he was misunderstood. I think he's even crazier than people gave him credit for. It actually swung the other way. What about rookie running backs?
Rookie running backs. I'm not a big fan of rookie running backs in general. The rookie running back that's getting the most buzz is Bishop Sankey. And I am not a fan of Bishop Sankey for a couple of reasons. And this has nothing to do with his ability. But the reason people are drafting him as high as they are, and they're drafting him really high, Bill, is because they believe he has the opportunity, that he is the guy. And I don't like drafting unproven guys just based on opportunity. I mean, the example I always give is Daniel Thomas. Remember Daniel Thomas from the Dolphins? And I was like, well, they used a second-round pick on him. He's going to be the guy. And then he was terrible. And so Bishop Sankey, frankly, has not had a good preseason. He's been running with, the second and third teams. Sean Green has been getting more run than him. You've got Dexter McCluster there. Wisenhunt is – Ken Wisenhunt's the new coach in Tennessee. He was the offense coordinator in San Diego last year. McCluster, they're at least going to try this. They're going to try Dexter McCluster in sort of the Danny Woodhead role. I think he's kind of an interesting deep sleeper if you're in a PPR league.
I like him.
But it's going to be a 3-headed monster at best, and at worst, Sankey's, going to be the change of pace guy, and they're going with Sean Green to start off with. So I don't know. People are drafting people are drafting Bishop Sankey way too high for my taste. So he's not a rookie running back that I love. There are other guys that I think are sort of interesting. I think Andre Williams in New York. If you want a rookie running back, I think he's a guy that's pretty interesting, going way late, and they like him a lot on the Giants.
You mentioned a lot of guys in that Bishop Sankey monologue that brought fear to my heart. First of all, Daniel Thomas.
Right.
Huge red flag. A lot of people have some bad memories with him. And then the fact that Sean Green is looking like the incumbent. We've all had Sean Green.
Yeah.
He's been on everyone's team. Nobody's ever enjoyed the experience.
Well, I mean, that's an excellent point. When you can't beat out Sean Green.
Yeah.
I mean, Bishop Sankey continues to drop. He's currently going 30th among running backs on ESPN.com. But so I think he's dropped. But here a couple of running backs that he's going ahead of. Just to give you, he's going ahead of Maurice Jones-Drew. Rather have MJD. He's going ahead of Pierre Thomas. I think he's going to have a really big year in New Orleans. He's going ahead of Noshawn Moreno. Going ahead of Fred Jackson. Fred Jackson was a top 10 fantasy running back last year. No one remembers that. He's going to still get the goal line carries in Buffalo.
I've learned not to trust you when you have a history with anyone you're talking about. I think Maurice Jones-Drew is a perfect example.
My friend Maurice?
Yeah. I don't trust any advice that you have about him whatsoever. No, thank you. I'm going to pass on your MJD advice.
Can I defend this a little bit? I hear you.
There's
Fair
no
enough.
defense.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, though.
All right. All I'm going to say is I'm merely saying I like him more than Bishop Sankey. I don't think I'm sitting here saying, he's a top 10 guy or anything like that. I don't know that that's an outrageous statement. I'm merely saying I like him more than Bishop Sankey, and I stand by that, Bill, my friendship with him notwithstanding. He looked pretty good, I thought, in the preseason game, ripped off that big touchdown. Oakland's going to have to run the ball. They can't let Matt Schaub throw it.
It's a great rationale when Matt Schaub is your quarterback and the only person who could beat you is Maurice Jones-Drew. I don't know if that's good or bad for fantasy.
Right, and MJD has been a top 10 fantasy running back on teams that were worse than the Raiders are going to be this year.
I just think he might be done.
He might be done. He's 29, but dedicated himself in the offseason. I think he's something to prove, chip on his shoulder. Here's a guy that throughout his career drafted late, always sort of had something to prove behind Fred Taylor, too small to be an every down back. Along the course of his career, he's always had a lot of naysayers, and he's always proved them wrong. For somebody who is currently going, he's currently going in the 9th round, Bill. He's the 31st running back off the board on ESPN.com. Why not? Why not take a gamble? I'd much rather him than somebody who has never done anything in the NFL in Bishop Sankey. That's my entire argument.
Good news. You dropped a "here's a guy" in that monologue, and then you got an extra $50 bonus that's in your direct deposit from ESPN. And if you say National Football League 5 times in the same monologue, that's an extra $200. Chris Carter cashes that in nonstop.
That's perfect. There should be this would be good for Grantland. There should be a Matthew Berry bingo. Some crutch phrases that I go to.
Well, you're talking so much. Of course, you're a human being. You're only going to have so much in the arsenal. You're talking about fantasy football for 6 hours a day, extemporaneously.
Exactly.
How much do you have? Here's where you and I always disagree, and this is one of the rare cases where I'm always right and you're always wrong.
Okay.
Every year there's a rookie running back who ends up in the top 10 for rushing yards. It happens all the time. We just don't know who it is yet, but it's going to be somebody on this list. I'm looking at, what about Carlos Hyde on San Francisco? How did he look?
He easily could be. It's just obviously Gore is there. But if something were to happen to Gore, Hyde would be the guy. I mean, and if I'm in a dynasty league, if I'm in a rookie draft, and he's the rookie running back I'm taking first. There's no question about it.
It takes one injury,
lot of guys
right?
that if things fall right, fantasy football is not just about talent, obviously. It's about opportunity.
Yeah.
That's why people are so high on Sankey, Bill, is because they think he's going to have the opportunity. But, yeah, if something were to happen to Jennings and Andre Williams were the every down back for New York, he would be a guy,
Well, that's
Devonta
the other
Freeman
guy.
in Atlanta, he could be a guy as well. I mean, we'll see, Steven Jackson's still there and Antoine Smith and everything like that. But if Freeman were to get, the majority touches, easily on that offense, he could be top 10.
Your Giants dude is a good one because, like all of you listening, I've had Rashad Jennings on my team for a cup of coffee. We all kind of passed him through in the waiver wire, and you had your cup of coffee and you let him go. Never really impressed by anything about Rashad Jennings, and I find it hard to believe that he's going to be able to hold off a rookie who has talent. I don't know if this guy has talent, but if he does, you know what I mean?
Last year, starting in Week 9, which is when he got when Rashad Jennings just basically became the starter for Oakland. You remember, they were finally done with McFadden, and Rashad.
I actually don't remember. I don't remember anything that happened with Oakland after Week 9. So you're enlightening me here.
Fair enough. Rashad Jennings, I will from week 9 on, Rashad Jennings was the 11th best running back in fantasy.
What?
Once he became, look at his numbers.
Really?
Yeah. Hang on, I'm gonna pull him up real quickly.
God, you just ground this podcast to a halt.
Starting in week 9. So starting in week 9, this is the first. That was the first week he got 15 or more carries.
Yeah.
He was the 11th best running back in terms of fantasy points in ESPN standard scoring. He was the 11th best in terms of total yards. He was tied for 9th in touchdowns, playing for the Raiders last year. Now he goes to New York, and under Tom Coughlin, the last 5 years, Giants running back second in the NFL in rushing touchdowns over the last 5 years. Now, that was under an old offensive coordinator. Ben McAdoo is the new offensive coordinator for the Giants. He wants to go more. He came from the Packers. He's going to go more no huddle, more West Coast. But regardless, just sort of common sense, and you look at the Giants, other than Ruben Randle, they don't have a red zone threat. Eli Manning can't pass anymore. I mean, I don't think he's attempted or completed he's completed very few passes beyond 10 yards in this preseason. He's looked terrible. I think there's going to be a lot of dump-offs. I think they trust Jennings in pass protection. They like Williams a lot, and he's going to score some goal line stuff. But Williams isn't getting all of it. I don't see Coughlin trusting a rookie near the goal line the whole time. So, yeah, give me some Rashad Jennings.
Well, so he's 29 years old. I'd be very interested to see if somebody who is 29 years old and had never even rushed for 750 yards in a season suddenly became a great fantasy back. Maybe it's happened. Maybe the nerds out there who know how to look up this stuff, because I don't, because I'm incompetent. I can't think of an example of a running back who was a late bloomer to that degree. But we will see. This is why you're the fantasy czar.
There you go.
I like the rookie. I think either that Giants rookie or the Niners rookie. If you take both of them, I feel like you just kind of cross your fingers and get lucky with one of them maybe.
I like both. No, I like both guys as flyers late. I wouldn't want to go into a draft with the other guy as my starter, but I certainly like both guys as flyers late. No question.
Okay. I don't mind giving this one away because my draft will have already happened.
All right.
Tell me why I shouldn't just love Alshon Jeffrey and just if somebody tries to get in a bidding war with me tonight, I just say, all right, let's pull it out and we'll see who has the bigger one here because I'm getting this guy. Tell me why I shouldn't do that.
I think you shouldn't do that. Has nothing to do with Alshon Jeffrey, who I absolutely love. He's going as the 8th wide receiver off the board, where I have him ranked as well. Guy's a stud. And I think the entire Bears offense is going to have a monster year. I'm high on Cutler this year. Marshall have another great year. Forte's a top 4 back. Whole thing. I think the reason you don't want to do that, just in general, though, is just basic auction strategy. I think you make a mistake if you go into any auction or any draft and you say, no matter what, I'm getting Alshon Jeffrey. Or I'm getting this guy, or there's no way I'm owning Maurice Jones-Drew, or whatever. I think you have to let the auction or the draft come to you, and you find where there's values, right? So, for example, on ESPN.com, Alshon Jeffrey is currently going for $27. That's his average value, right?
Yeah.
So if for all of a sudden, and it's saying you're on a $200 cap, so if all of a sudden Alshon Jeffrey's at $40, why are you going to do that? Because somebody's going to overspend, which means then, I don't know, maybe you get Randall Cobb for $5 cheaper than he should go, or Antonio Brown or somebody else that's sort of going in that area. Jordy Nelson, maybe you get $5 cheaper. I just think if you fall too much in love with a player, that's where you run into trouble. So that's why I wouldn't do that, where I wouldn't just say, I don't care no matter what, I'm coming away with Alshon Jeffrey, because that's when you get in trouble.
Well, here's the problem with that. I've tried your strategy every year, and I don't even remember the last time I won this league. I think it was the whatever Adrian Peterson's rookie year was. That was my last title, which is a while. What was that, 06?
Yeah.
God, I haven't won my league since 06.
It's been a long while.
That's
been a minute.
Pathetic.
Again, as the kids say, look how hip I am.
But
do you really think that's my fault, Bill, in all fairness?
No.
Okay.
The problem is I assembled the greatest fantasy team anyone's ever put together. And when you do that, it's tough. It's just it's tough to even get motivated to just put in the hard work. It's like you win the Triple Crown in baseball, and then you have to go back to the gym a week later, and you're just not ready yet. That's how I feel 8 years later.
You got fat and lazy. You got the big contract, and now
I do. I'll never have a better fantasy team than that. So it's tough to even. Plus, everybody's good at fantasy now. Like, remember the days, 12, 14 years ago, it would be like, there are 3 guys who knew what they were doing in the league, and the other 7 guys were schmucks.
Yes.
And you just cherry pick people and load your team, and deep down you knew you were facing the other 2 guys who knew what they were doing, and then the one guy who was just pulling guys out of his butt. And
Right.
it'd be the 4 of you the whole year. Now it's like everybody knows. Like, everybody knows about Carlos Hyde.
Yeah.
I'm not shocking anyone with Carlos Hyde for $7 in 5 hours into our auction.
No,
it's not happening.
It's become. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
All right. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, there's a lot more people, frankly, like me, right? And there's a lot more people, thanks to Twitter and 24-hour news cycle and the proliferation of both fantasy and just, thirst for NFL knowledge. It's like, a guy leaves practice 10 minutes early, and all of a sudden it's all over Twitter.
Yeah.
And people are, going crazy, right? Benny Cunningham starts ahead of Zach Stacy in the preseason game, and all of a sudden Twitter goes crazy 5 minutes into that game, third preseason game. So part of the problem is now it's not about finding that information because it's already available. It's figuring out which information to trust and which to ignore because there's so much of it and sort of like, helping yourself through the chaos and the mess. And hopefully that's what I do and what some other people do as well.
So you have Megatron 1, Demaryius Thomas 2, Des Bryant a tiny bit back at 3, and then Brandon Marshall 4, Julio Jones 5, Jordy Nelson 6, AJ Green 7, and then my dude Jeffrey doesn't come up till 8.
Yeah.
How do you have Jeffrey behind Brandon Marshall? Explain that one.
Well, the fact of the matter is that I think Marshall has more of a connection with Cutler. Those 2 guys have played together, whether it was in Denver and Chicago. They have a ton of targets together. If you look at the games from last year in which Cutler was the starter, Marshall was the better fantasy player. Now, I'm not worried about it. Alshon Jeffrey had 2 200-yard games last year, and one of them came with Cutler as the quarterback. So, I mean, I don't buy into the narrative that, Cutler's not going to look to Alshon Jeffrey. He is. But, look, as great as Alshon Jeffrey was last year, Brandon Marshall outscored him by 12 points. So it's close. I mean, I have Marshall at 5 and Jeffrey at 8. Like, I have them very close, but I prefer the veteran who seems to have a little bit more of a connection with Cutler. But honestly, all those guys are super close, Bill. I mean, I think Jeffrey, again, has a shorter track record, so I think he's in a slightly less tier than the other guys you mentioned. Yeah. But they're all studs.
Well, and then if you throw in Antonio Brown, who is your 9th receiver, I'm not going to throw in Randall Cobb at 10 because the little guys scare me a little bit. But those first 9, if I'm getting the 9th best guy out of those 9 guys for the cheapest price, I'm doing backflips. I'm feeling really good.
I mean, but that's my point. That's my point. So when you're in an auction, one of those guys won't go for what they're supposed to, and that's the skill of an auction is figuring out when that is, having your values and knowing what each guy is worth, trusting your projections, and being able to say, like, hey, you know what? That's way too – I didn't come into this draft expecting to come away with A.J. Green, but that's way too cheap for him. Sure, I'll throw another buck out there, and maybe you wind up with A.J. Green. Here's a trick that I like to do. I'll give you 2 quick auction tips, Bill.
Okay.
Number one is that – so we're talking about those wide receivers, and if you basically say, hey, I want to come away with one of those 9 guys. So you just said, I'd be doing backflips if one of those guys is my number 1 wide receiver. So okay,
for a
great.
cheap price.
Right, so now you have a tier. So most people are going to be eyeing Calvin and Demaryius, right, at the very top of that. So why not if you like Alshon Jeffrey, I would throw him out early. While there's still Calvin and Demaryius, because probably most people in your league are going to go in with that same attitude. I want one of those big guys. And so maybe it's the bidding, after 1 round or something like that, you throw out Alshon Jeffrey, and most people will get you know what, I'm going to bail out on this because I still got Calvin on the board. I still got Demaryius, Dez. I'll get in on one of those. So I always like to throw out the 3rd or 4th guy at a position as opposed to the number 1 because I think there'll be some people in your auction that won't bid because they think they can get that. And then how many times do you see it in an auction? Then Calvin comes out and he just goes for crazy money. He goes for
I'm going to stop you
20...
for 1 second. You've stumbled into a theory that I've been thinking about for a while because this happened in our fantasy baseball too. I call it the pre-tipping point.
Very Gladwellian of you. I'm listening.
Thank you. Well, I can't come up with a better title yet, but it's easy to understand that way.
Right.
So there comes a point in an auction where the big guns start going, and everybody realizes there's only 5 of these guys left. I got to get in on this one. I can't not have a team with a big gun because then you feel like you've been emasculated.
Right.
But there's always one guy right before that tipping point happens that goes for like $3 or $5 less than he should have gone for. And everybody realizes it right when it's done because they're in the back of their head thinking, no, I'm going to wait. And then the guy's gone. And then everybody collectively at the same time, without saying it out loud, because you never want to give anyone credit in a fantasy draft, tell him he made a nice pick.
Right.
They all go, I thought he was going to go for 42. I should have kept going. I screwed up. Now, That guy in my AL Keeper League is always Miguel Cabrera. He always goes for 4 or 5. He always goes early. People think there's more guys, and then we always get mad because he went for 36 instead of 42. So you think Alshon Jeffrey should be the pre-tipping point guy?
Yeah, especially
I throw him out in like my second guy. I just whip him out, and people will be like, Calvin Johnson, AJ Green, I'm not getting in on this one.
Right. I think he'd be a great guy, especially given that you really like him. I also think Jordy Nelson would be a great pre-tipping point guy, to use your phrase there.
We could do better than pre-tipping point. The premature. There's some. If anyone who can come up with a good one, send it to us on the email or Twitter or something.
Jordy Nelson if you look over the last 3 years, there have been 36 games where him and Aaron Rodgers were both on the field. And if you take the per-game averages of when Jordy and Aaron Rodgers play together, put them on a 16-game pace, it's over 1,200 yards, 12 touchdowns, which last year would have been 2 points fewer than Des Bryant, okay? Last year, just if you want to take 1 year, smaller sample size, but last year with Eddie Lacy in the backfield, the whole thing, last year in the 9 games that Rodgers and Nelson played together, he averaged almost 9 targets a game, almost 100 yards, and almost a touchdown per game. You're looking at, over a full 16-game season, 1,500 yards, 12 touchdowns, which would have been 2 points better than Demaryius Thomas last year.
Do you know
this is what I wrote I wrote this in my love-hate column on ESPN. He's the only wide receiver other than Julio Jones that's being drafted outside the top 5 at his position that has a legit shot at being the number 1 fantasy wide receiver this year.
Don't cheat. Don't look at your notes. Where does Jordy Nelson rank in your top 5 white fantasy guys?
He's number 1. Answer. Come on. Who's better than him?
No, I mean in your actual rankings.
Oh, in my actual rankings?
Yeah.
He's the number 1 guy.
No, Peyton Manning's 1.
Oh, no, I thought you meant just among wide receivers.
No.
Among
he's in the top 5.
Players, he would be probably 4th. He's definitely behind
4th.
The 3 big quarterbacks.
Yeah. And he's ahead of Gronk. Thanks for putting Gronk in. I appreciate that. I'm not going near him.
Yes, I have Gronk higher than him. Yep, I like Gronk 3. Because my argument there was there are a couple spots, is that both guys, the only concern with Gronk or Jordy Nelson is injuries, obviously. And if you're going to basically say, I don't care about injuries, I think this is the year they stay healthy for all 16 games, give me the guy with Gronk who could be number 1 at his position. So could Jordy Nelson, but Gronkowski gives you a bigger advantage at a position. Obviously, there's a lot less dominant tight ends than there are wide receivers.
And finishing last in the Matthew Berry White Guy Power Rankings, Matt Shop. Congratulations to Matt. Hey, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
We're talking about throwing out guys early to try to sneak a fastball by. I'm really mad at you. I didn't want to bring this up, but I'm mad at you.
Fair enough.
My big plan was I think Josh Gordon plays this year.
Yes.
And I think he plays for a variety of reasons. The main one being that Ray Rice got suspended for 2 games for dragging his unconscious girlfriend, who obviously assaulted, out of an elevator. He got 2 games for that. And Josh Gordon is going to lose the entire season because he smoked pot twice. And I think at some point the league is going to look at that and say, we are going to get killed for this. Let's figure out some sort of way to, some sort of out so this doesn't become even a bigger story than it already is. I see Josh Gordon, some sort of deal, 6 games, 8 games, whatever, and he's back for the second half of the year. Now, I thought I was a genius for thinking about all this. Then you do some column, I think last week or a couple days ago, and you laid out the whole scenario. And now every draft that's out there, everyone has Josh Gordon on their radar, and I blame you.
Fair enough. I get that a lot, and it's always frustrating doing what I do. And I don't know if you feel this way too. Sometimes with your picks or anything like that. But Cordero Patterson is a guy that I absolutely love. I loved last year. I loved him a year ago. And it's one of those things that's like, so you see him from the week before, this past week he had the huge touchdown, and now you're like, man. And so it's like, I probably won't own Cordero Patterson in any leagues. I won't be willing to draft him where, I've now hyped him up so much that I can't even get him. I own him in one dynasty league, but other than that, so it's the same sort of thing that you put it out there and you're like, do I put, I have to write about it because that's my job, is to give advice, but it definitely hurts you in your own personal leagues. Obviously, I agree with everything you just said because I had the same sort of thing. They got so much bad PR for the Ray Rice decision that I think it's going to look really bad if he gets an entire year, especially when the facts come out, which is Josh Gordon has passed, I believe. Listen, and I know Adam Schefter, Roger Cossack, but I believe the facts are that he's passed 70 drug tests prior to this one, and that the false positive or whatever, that there's a margin of error on the tests, and it's within the range. Like he took 2 tests, and one was negative and one was barely positive, and that it had been. I don't understand all this, but just basically, there's enough question where it's not nearly a slam dunk that you might think it is because you see the drunk driving and the DUI and all that stuff, and you think he's a knucklehead, and he may or may not be. But in this particular case, what's being ruled on is that there's a lot of sort of, a lot of gray area, if you will. Yeah. And so I think because of that, he's hired the lawyer that he has had success in cases like this, getting other people off or getting reduced sentences. So I agree for all that. So yeah, I mean, I took him in the last round of a draft the other day.
An interesting sports movie would be a fantasy guy played loosely based on yourself, Mike Berry,
right.
Mike Darian. So, sports movie. A fantasy guy he's so mad, he hates his life. He decides he's going to just give out bad advice for the 4 weeks leading up, and he's going to have all these Cordero Patterson type things and he's just going to try to steer people wrong. I don't think this movie even gets greenlit, but I just like the premise.
Right.
He's just off the deep end. Maybe it's an SNL sketch that doesn't
it's
like bombs and dress rehearsal.
It's probably more of a sketch, or it's probably an episode of The League.
Because you have a lot of power right now. Like you really could pump up the wrong guy intentionally.
Yes. Sometimes I pump up the wrong guy, but it's never intentionally. It is. People have said that to me and that kind of stuff that we've seen. There's certainly in terms of, at least on the ESPN, the ADP of certain players. Cordero Patterson, and I'm not the only one, by the way. I don't want to sit here and think I'm the only one. There's a lot of guys that like Cordero Patterson too. I'm not alone in that. But
I actually had him in one of my leagues last year, and it was the league where you get more points for long touchdowns.
Right.
And it was phenomenal.
He's great for that.
Yeah, he has like 80-yard touchdowns every other game, basically.
If you look at what Norv Turner has done over his career, he loves vertical passing. He loves deep threats. He was the offense coordinator in Cleveland last year with Josh Gordon, made Josh Gordon the number one wide receiver in fantasy despite missing 2 games. In the 5 years previous to Cleveland, when he was at San Diego, only the Colts attempted more passes downfield. Norv Turner throughout his career has been a vertical guy, and you look at the Vikings and who they have and who's going to be their vertical guy, it's going to be Cordero Patterson, who is just lightning fast. He looks like a video game out there. So I've said this before. This is going to be the last season that you can get Cordero Patterson outside the first couple rounds.
Norv Turner's a vertical guy, but if he's coaching your team is horizontal because it's lying on the ground because you're not winning. Thank you. Quarterbacks, really quickly.
Yes, sir.
I mean, everyone knows who the good quarterbacks are. Is there anybody you're kind of secretly worried about who people think is a sure thing, but you feel like might not be a sure thing, other than Robert Griffin, and we don't need to talk about him?
Yeah, I mean, obviously certainly the preseason hasn't gone right for RG3. In terms of quarterbacks, I'm certainly a little nervous about Cam. I was on the I don't care receiving core bandwagon, and I actually still don't. I think Kelvin Benjamin's going to have a monster year. I think, Greg Olsen, it's not like his receiving core was great. It's sort of like, Brandon LaFell of the world and Steve Smith, who is a little past his prime. So he was. I love Steve Smith, but let's be honest. And Brandon LaFell, yes.
Hey, he's on the Pats.
That is true.
Be careful.
Congratulations.
He works the sideline in the back of the end zone nicely. I'm in.
I'm not convinced he makes your team. Do you think Brandon LaFell definitely makes the Patriots this year?
You're talking to somebody who's done like a 3-hour Google deep dive on Jimmy Garoppolo. So I'm the wrong guy to ask. Wrong guy to ask.
Fair enough.
Quarterback. So Cam Newton. We're both afraid of Robert Griffin.
Because the argument for Cam, by the way, top 5 fantasy quarterback every year he's been in the league, and it's all about the running, right? And he is their goal line back. He will keep the ball at the goal line. However, now he's got the hairline fracture in the ribs, and the ankle's not 100%. It keeps getting banged up. That offensive line is brutal. It's going to be a really not a great offensive line in Carolina. So you're just like, if this guy keeps getting beat up, do they try to protect him more? They've got 3 guys at running back there in Williams, Stewart, and Tolbert that can carry the ball at the goal line. And if you suddenly take away some of the running because they need to keep him upright, he's a lot less interesting as a fantasy quarterback. So that's a guy that makes me a little bit nervous. I'm probably not going to own him this year.
Romo?
Romo makes me a little nervous too, obviously, with the back and everything like that. But if he plays all 16 games, just a monster season. Scott Linehan threw the ball 634 times for Detroit last year. I mean, he throws some more. And then you look at that defense of Dallas, like they're just going to be throwing all the time. So just Linehan, whether it was with Matthew Stafford, Dante Culpepper back in the day, like he's had good fantasy quarterbacks. I don't count the year he had Gus Frerotte because no one can make Gus Frerotte a good fantasy quarterback. But in general, the track record of Scott Linehan with a quarterback has produced very good fantasy numbers. So Romo, who's going outside the top 12, I think has a very good shot of being a top 10 fantasy quarterback. I got a good stat for you. You will like this stat.
Yeah, okay.
Last year, Patriots wide receivers were tackled at the 1-yard line 8 times.
And Calvin Johnson was tackled at the 1-yard line 17 times.
Yeah, the previous year.
Right.
Only one quarterback last year had more drops than Tom Brady. Tom Brady somehow is going outside the top 10, Bill.
It's like
in terms of draft position.
It's like that in what it was 2006. Everyone got bored of taking Marvin Harrison.
Right.
He was, and you had a list this year, guys. I always feel like Marvin Harrison was the first guy. It was his generation, and maybe there was some guy in the late '90s who everybody got tired of, but there was like a 2-3 year stretch where you could just steal Marvin Harrison at half value because nobody wanted to take him anymore.
Yeah, Brady's now snuck up to. I'm looking at our most recent ADP. Brady has now snuck up to QB number 8. He keeps rising, but I just think that's insane. I think Tom Brady is, obviously a very good fantasy quarterback. He disappointed a lot of fantasy owners last year, but didn't have Gronk for most of the year. Didn't have Vereen.
It's a messed up season.
Piece of his passing offense.
Yeah, how about this? Aaron Hernandez went to I can't speak. Aaron Hernandez went to jail. And heading into that season, it was an offense built around the 2 tight ends. And they lost both of them basically, and they lost Amendola, and that was the year from hell. They're not going to have another year like that. I think Brady, plus he's got young Garoppolo breathing down his neck. He's got Revis. He's got to go against in practice now, and Brandon Browner. I like it. I like Brady this year too, and I love Phil Rivers. I like that whole San Diego team. I like Roethlisberger in a contract year. How about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think quarterback is very deep this year. I think Roethlisberger will be fine as well. Look, I'm back. I think Matt Ryan will be very good this year. Colin Kaepernick, if you look at what he did, if you take his game starting when Michael Crabtree came back last year and take it all the way through the NFC Championship game, so basically every game he played with Michael Crabtree in the lineup, and just used his fantasy points from those games, including the postseason, he was a top 5 fantasy quarterback in terms of points per game. Scored half a point more than Aaron Rodgers averaged last year. So I think Kaepernick has a nice year as well. Russell Wilson's having a huge preseason. We just talked about Brady. Obviously Nick Foles had a huge year last year. Quarterback's really deep. My take on it this year, Bill, is that I either want to be one of the first guys in my league to get a quarterback or the very last. Like if you don't get Peyton Manning, Aaron Rodgers, or Drew Brees, one of those 3 guys, give me anyone else. Like any one of those guys, any one of the remaining 12 guys, you can be just fine. And you may have personal preference. We talked about Cutler. I think Cutler's going to have a monster year as well. Any one of those guys is just fine. So
Matt
wait on quarterback.
Matt Schaub not just
3,
fine.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Matt Schaub not fine.
No, Matt Schaub not fine. Poor Matt Schaub. Matt Schaub's going to be tuning into the BS report. Hey, I've always liked Simmons. Let me see what his fantasy preview is like. Hey, Hey.
No, he doesn't like me because I wrote last year that I thought he was done. Because when a QB loses his confidence, it's over. Doesn't come back. It's like race car driving. Although I guess in Days of Thunder it did come back for Tom Cruise, but very rarely does it come back if you're a race car driver or a QB.
What was his name in Days of Thunder?
Cole Trickle?
Cole Trickle, that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound like a fake name at all.
Not at all.
Hey,
yeah,
we didn't
I
even
agree with
mention.
you. I think his confidence is totally shot. Do you ever hear from? I get this question sometimes. I'm curious. I know you were joking with Shaw, but do you actually ever hear from athletes when you've written something mean, or like when you're doing NBA and you trash a guy on TV? Does like either an agent or does somebody reach out to you and be like, hey, like, do you ever get grief?
Michael Carter Williams' agent was really mad that I didn't vote for him for Rookie of the Year, which I thought was funny because he's actually a good guy. I don't know. He was just being irrational about it. I think it's funny when something like that, where it's an opinion thing, you know, like an award, and somebody gets mad that you didn't take the guy that they thought should have won. But in general, Twitter seems like, I think the more common Twitter becomes, the more it'll be like it. Like if you kill somebody in your week 1 fantasy column, it's not improbable now that guy will fire back at you on Twitter. Take a shot.
I mean, I've heard privately from a few people, not a ton. I've heard privately from a few guys that I don't like, and you know that I'll say like I don't like that. It's not that I don't like the guy, but I think he'll have a bad game, or I don't like him this season for this reason. And every once in a while, you'll hear from somebody.
Well, you know the point guard Mo Williams.
Sure, I remember him. Yeah.
Got mad at me last year because I said the Jazz didn't have a point guard. Took a shot at me on Twitter. I was like, I stand by it. Or maybe it was 2 years ago. I was like, I stand by it. The Jazz don't have a point guard. Quickly, we have to hit a couple because we got to go soon.
All right.
Any rookie receivers? It's so tough. I know Brandon Cooks. You mentioned Kelvin Benjamin. Anyone else? Any possible Keenan Allens out there?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, you know, I don't know that you ever expect a year like what Allen had, but you mentioned Cooks, obviously Sammy Watkins, like Mike Evans seems to be going under the radar. You know, everyone's talking about Cooks, everyone's talking about Watkins, and Kelvin Benjamin sort of starting to get some buzz. But
wait, hold on. Did the Mike Evans TMZ fight video push him higher up your board? Because it did for me. Did you see him dance between the two bouncers and hop on the car? Like, it was like, this guy's amazing. I'm taking him.
Yeah, no question. It was good scouting. He was very nimble. He's a guy that has a lot of balance. Look, I grew up in College Station, so I watch every Texas A&M game, and Johnny Manziel would just throw these bombs like in the middle of triple coverage, and Mike Evans, who's like 6'5", would just go up in the middle of traffic and come down with it every single time. He's Jimmy Graham, is what he is. I mean, he's basically very similar to Jimmy Graham. If I had to comp him to somebody. And he's just a big target, and obviously Vincent Jackson's going to demand a lot of attention. You know, Josh McCown, you saw it last year, throws up a nice kind of like jump ball, if you will. He did that a lot with Jeffrey and Marshall. So I think Mike Evans is kind of interesting. Jordan Matthews, also, if you want to look for a rookie wide receiver really late.
Yeah.
Look, I don't think I don't think Jeremy Maclin plays all 16 games. They're going to throw a lot in Philadelphia. I mean, it's just going to be a high up-tempo offense. Who knows if Riley Cooper can hang for the entire season, too. And regardless, Matthews is going to be the slot guy. So I think he's really interesting. The Eagles are filled with kind of fantasy goodness, if you will, Bill. Zach Ertz is going to have a big year as well.
You can never go wrong with just taking dudes on a team that's going to score 35 to 36 points a game.
Yeah, no question.
You mentioned Tampa Bay's offensive line really worried you. I think this is an interesting thing to look at for fantasy and something that I think about in the back of my head. If a team can't block, usually that affects every part of what they're doing. And I still like that Tampa team for some reason. Are there other teams that their offensive line is so bad you would just not even want to take their fantasy guys?
I don't know that they're necessarily so bad. I mean, you mentioned Tampa Bay. I am concerned about Carolina. About their offensive line. I am concerned about the Chiefs' offensive line. One of the reasons I have Jamal Charles at 3 is because they lost 3 starters off the offensive line. The offensive line is entirely why the not entirely, but one of the big reasons why the Falcons season just went horribly wrong last year. Obviously, losing Julio Jones for much of the season and Roddy White not being right. contributed a big deal to that. But like I think the Falcons have fixed their offensive line. I think Jake Matthews is a stud. Moving him to left tackle is the right move. So, like I'm big. I think the Falcons have a big bounce back year. So I think the offensive line is certainly one piece of the puzzle. And as a Washington fan, obviously, I'm not thrilled with how that offensive line has played this preseason as well.
Who is this year's winner of the 2013 Jets Award for the team that you know you won't have anyone on your fantasy team from?
Probably the Rams. Probably the Rams.
Oh, I like what you just did there. You're right.
What's weird is I have Zach Stacy in a keeper league, so I will actually have it. But in terms of redraft leagues, like I moved Zach Stacy down to the end of the third round. He's going higher than that on ESPN. My guess is I won't own Zach Stacy in any leagues. And I like Zach Stacy a lot. Like I think he's a really talented NFL running back, but Benny Cunningham has outplayed him so far in camp. We'll see. And like I mentioned, Cunningham started over him in the third game. Fisher was like, we just wanted to see what Cunningham could do behind, with the first team offense. We know what Zach can do, but I don't know. Why wouldn't you want to see what? I mean, the whole idea of the third game is to sort of like, hey, let's practice what it would be like in a game situation. I don't know. It makes me a little bit nervous, and not a great schedule for St. Louis, at least against So I don't know. Zach Stacy is a guy that I probably won't own, and then you look at the rest of St. Louis, and like you don't want any of the wide receivers. Like maybe you take a flyer on Brian Quick or Kenny Britt or Tavon Austin or whatever. You're not doing the quarterback. So the Rams are probably my team that I won't own anyone on.
So, and flipping that around, the teams that we like just to score points, that you're not bad. It's not a bad thing if you have their third receiver, or their third down back or whatever. We like New Orleans. We like Philly.
The Broncos, obviously. I think
Denver.
The Patriots are going to score a ton of points.
Yeah.
I think the Bengals actually are going to be better than people think. Obviously they're a playoff team, but just from a fantasy perspective, Dallas. I think Dallas is going to score a ton of points because they're going to have to, because that defense is just so brutal.
You know how I really genuinely don't care about fantasy anymore after assuming the greatest team ever? Part of me wants to go into my draft tonight and use my last 10 picks on quarterbacks. I've always wanted to see somebody do that. It's such a novel strategy, right? Because quarterbacks get hurt every year. What if somebody just swallowed up all the potential starters you could have? Wouldn't that guy hold all the cards, or am I nuts?
I think you're a little nuts, because I think that hurts your bench depth everywhere else. And, yes, quarterbacks get hurt, but they don't get hurt nearly the way that running backs or wide receivers do. Other than Aaron Rodgers last year, who really got hurt that you care about? That was a starter. Cutler missed a couple of games.
Yeah. I always feel like I don't have enough quarterbacks on my roster after 2 weeks. And I have all these guys who are like, the backup running back on this team, and then that's the guy I waive. But nobody ever waives like Phil Rivers, those type of guys, right? Those are always like there's going to be like a whole Rivers, Roethlisberger, Andy Dalton. There's a whole bunch of those guys that you're going to be able to start 4 times, and they're going to put up big points.
That's right.
Maybe the move is to get 5 of them.
I guess. I don't think it will have the effect you want. I don't think it will create a trade demand, because I don't think what you'd be willing to give them up for, people are going to want to trade, because what's the difference between a guy like that and a guy you can pick up off the waiver wire that'll have a good matchup? Like, I'll give you a couple of sort of deep quarterback sleepers, if you will.
Okay.
I think Jake Locker has a nice year in Tennessee.
I like Jake Locker as well.
Philip Rivers was left for dead before Wisenhunt showed up. So I like Jake Locker. I like Carson Palmer.
Oh, no. Oh, boy. Oh, no.
Listen, Carson Palmer, over the final 7 weeks of last year, Bill, only Peyton Manning had more passing yards. There are only 6 quarterbacks with more passing touchdowns than Carson Palmer.
Great.
They're going to throw a ton. You got Fitzgerald, you got Michael Floyd, Andre Ellington with a bigger role. Love Andre Ellington this year. He's a nice pass catcher. And it's interesting. People will talk about the NFC West with the schedule, and I was sort of going there with Zach Stacy. But the truth is, San Francisco's defense is really banged up. Arizona's defense is in a shell of itself. They've had a ton of injuries. I think the Rams have a good defense, and Seattle's got a great defense. But the NFC West isn't nearly as daunting, and obviously Palmer plays for Arizona, so it's a little sideways. But I wanted to mention that about the NFC West, and that was the only way I could.
Can I say something? I'm really glad Carson Palmer had a good last 7 weeks. But if you had him in fantasy, your season was over in week 14. So you didn't really get to experience any of those weeks.
Well,
You had a couple. And then you got to watch the rest from the sidelines because you weren't in the playoffs.
We're talking about deep sleepers at quarterback, right? So
he's
these are guys
actually
going
in a
outside
coma.
the top 15.
I think he's
Cutler's
a
going
deep
15th
coma.
overall. I think he's a top 10 guy.
Right. I know. I think Carson Palmer's a coma sleeper.
I got one more for you.
Okay.
If you think you laughed at Carson Palmer, wait till you hear this one. Geno Smith.
Man, Geno killed the Pats once. I'm a little afraid of Geno.
Geno there were brutal, brutal moments last year. There's no question about it. But he also had 5 different 20-point fantasy games last year. That was more than Andrew Luck, the same amount as Cam Newton or Russell Wilson. I mean, when he was going right, and you look at who he had last year, which is nobody. Adding Eric Decker, adding Chris Johnson to the backfield, having even Jeremy Curley, who's nothing special, but at least having Jeremy Curley there for a full year. I think Jason Morrow was a nice draft pick. So he's got more weapons around him. Another year in the league, I think he's looked really good this preseason. Got the running ability. Like, we've seen him put up big fantasy numbers. I mean, 20 points is nothing to sneeze at. Like I said, more than Andrew Luck, the same amount of 20-point games as Wilson or Cam Newton last year.
So what could I do to torment the people in my draft? Could I just keep taking could I take like 4 of the top 9 receivers? That wouldn't work. There's no way to really mess with people.
Certainly, it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is entirely just to screw with the league and you don't care about winning, then you might as well. I mean, you could take every quarterback. You fill your bench with quarterbacks. You know?
My goal would be to flip the league a little bit while also like somehow still having a chance to compete, which maybe is impossible with an auction.
I think in an auction, I think it's really impossible. I think your best chance is in an auction is just to sort of, and I think you would probably be very good at this, is just sort of trash talk and be annoying and try to throw people off their game. Constantly ask, wait, how much did he go for? Wait, what do you have? Well, you paid how much for who? What? And just sort of like try to get them off their game, because to your point, people lose focus in an auction because it goes on for a long time, and that's when you sneak in and sort of grab the sleepers. I'll give you one more auction.
No, I figured it out. I know what I'm going to do.
Okay,
you know that guy who throws out the guy, he does like the little, like the fishing pole throw, and it's always a quote-unquote accident, and then everyone crosses that guy off, and then he throws him out later when nobody has any money left.
Oh, yeah.
And he has the money left. Maybe I'll be that guy.
That's a pretty good move.
I throw out a couple. Is Josh Gordon, I won't throw him out. I'm going to throw out Bishop Sankey. And then like, a couple of people crossed off Josh Gordon, and then I'm like kind of waiting in the weeds with $60, and everybody else has 10. And a couple that might work.
That's a really good one. Just, has he been, is Josh Gordon still available? That's always a good one. I want to say, okay. And then you're like, all right, so Josh Gordon's still out there, blah, 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 yep. And then people, they've heard the name Josh Gordon.
Yeah.
And then you're like, never mind. Bishop Sankey for $1. And then, I think that's
because people get groggy.
Move.
At the draft, it's 4 or 5 hours. You get groggy. You can't remember this name. And it's also the easiest way to make everybody mad at you is throwing out the name and then deciding not to take the person or whatever happens.
That's the fantasy football equivalent of like giving someone a fake number.
Yes. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it today. I'll report back.
Perfect.
Anything else? We hit all the topics.
One more auction tip for you.
Okay.
One quick auction tip for you. I also like to go, depending on what player you are, if there's a player that you really like a big-name player, like you liked Alshon Jeffrey, but even bigger, like if you're like, I love Adrian Peterson this year, or, I definitely want Peyton Manning. If there's a big-name player that you want, a lot of times people in an auction like to wait. They'll say, I'm going to wait. You're not sneaking Peyton Manning by anyone. You're not sneaking Adrian Peterson or Julio Jones or whatever. If there's one guy that you think is going to have a monster year. So I like to throw that guy out first. So if for example, say you want Peyton Manning this year, when it comes to me, and say I budgeted $60 for him, right? So this is always, I think, an important thing to do before you go into an auction is sort of, budget out, I'm going to spend $60 on my quarterbacks. I'm going to spend, and I'm making up numbers here, $80 on my running backs combined. I want, one good wide receiver. I'll go cheap on tight end, $1 for a kicker, $1 for a defense, and $40 for my bench combined. So budget it out like that. And so once you have a budget, I think that will help you out, and you can use like average auction prices on ESPN.com or software is out there that's available. And so you have your budget, right? I prefer to throw out Peyton Manning immediately so that I know if I'm in or out. Because if I'm saying like I'm spending $60 on Peyton Manning and he suddenly goes for 85, and I'm like, okay, I'm not doing that. So now I've got to completely readjust. Now at least I know very early on in the auction that I'm not in on Peyton Manning, and now I've got $60 to play with elsewhere. And I can decide whether I want to go after Breeze or Rodgers, or I want to go cheap on quarterback, and then I can use that money and push it to another running back or wide receiver. Or conversely, if I get Peyton Manning early, say maybe I get him for 55. Okay, great. Now I've got $5 extra to play with. I rather know early as opposed to I'm saving my money for Manning. I'm saving my money for Manning. And then he comes out like in the 5th or 6th round, and he then goes for 85. And then you're screwed because everyone else has been gone at that point, and you've got this $60 that you were saving and no one else to spend it on or something like that. So if there's a specific player that you want to target, I always like to, instead of, quote, waiting on him, I like to throw him out early, and I want to know whether I'm in on him or not, whether I've got him or not, because then I can adjust my auction strategy the rest of the way.
Last question. Have you thought about having more kids for a potential reality show?
We are done. My wife, actually, it's funny. My wife, God bless her, loves being pregnant and obviously loves children. And so about a year after we had our twins, she said something like, I don't know, should we maybe one more, like, make it an even 6? I'm like, no, what are you doing? Are you crazy? We are no, we are done. We're done. And now it's funny, the oldest boy is 16, so we're and we've got a 14-year-old boy too, so we're in the teenage boy year. So yeah, my wife is like, I don't know what we were thinking. Like, I can't imagine an extra one. Like, it's crazy. So
if you're gonna have 5, you might as well have 6. I mean, Jesus.
Well, that was her argument. 5 is plenty. It's chaos at home. It's good chaos, but it's chaos.
Because 6 is then you can do the Brady Bunch opening credits. You could have somebody at ESPN do that for you, and then you always have that the rest of your life. You're still one away. You need the maid, and you need one more kid.
Yeah. It's weird. It's interesting. There have been a couple of opportunities for both my wife and my kids to be on TV, not in a reality show necessarily, but interviews or features that people were doing on me that wanted to sort of see my home life, and they hate it. It's interesting. So many people, desperately want to be on TV and that kind of stuff, and none of them have any interest whatsoever.
I think one more kid, and then the mistake kid gets you to 7, and now you have a title. 7 kids ranging from baby to a kid in college, and ESPN just keeps adding channels, and fantasy's involved. There's something going on. Maybe you should have enough kids to have a whole fantasy league with them, and that's the show.
We do. Well, we do. I do a fantasy. In fact, that was the last draft I did on Sunday. We did our friends and family draft. So my wife and I and all of our kids and like their friends and their parents, and we do a whole thing. My wife's ex-husband is in the league as well.
This is a show.
I know.
Your wife's ex-husband is in the league?
Yep, her ex-husband's in the league. He's been in. I've written about this. Yeah, she's. Yeah, it's one of those. It's one of those things where I'll quickly tell the story. This is in the book. It's but basically, I was always cordial with him. He was always cordial with me. They get along. Obviously, he lives 5 minutes from our house. He's heavily involved in the boys' lives. But it's a weird, awkward sort of situation, right? I'm in a house with his sons, and
yeah.
And so about a year after we had been married, my wife and I, the oldest boy, who was 12 at the time, said, can I do fantasy football? I want to try fantasy football with you. And so we were like, okay. So we decided to start like this friends and family league with this, our kids and everything like that. And I ran into my wife's ex at a football game. We were like doing the swap or something like that. And I just said to him, I said, hey, I don't know if you've ever played fantasy football before, if you want to do it, but we're doing this like little league with the kids and everything. Like, so we're doing it Sunday. Like, I don't know if you want to, you could own a team with our 10-year-old at the time, and he's just like, okay. And he came with his longtime girlfriend, and it was very weird, but it was one of those things where, like, the kids all saw us hanging out, like, and our mutual friend saw us, and it was one of those things where this big weight was lifted off because they're like, oh, so mom and dad and Matthew and, his longtime girlfriend are all in the same room and they're having beers and everyone's getting along and like, oh, I don't have to tiptoe around anyone. And our mutual friends were like, oh, I can have a party and they can both be invited. Like no one's throwing anything. Everyone's getting along and having fun. And so it's the fourth year of the league this year. And yeah, I mean, my wife jokes I get along better with him than she does. Like I like the guy, it's like, so anyway.
Well, there you go.
It's been neat. It's been very good. And it's definitely helped like kind of our very blended modern, family mixed marriages and everything like that, get along. There's no question.
My experience with this stuff is everybody's family has some sort of wrinkle. I've yet to meet the family that was just, here it is. And then that's it. There's no story. Every family has a story.
Yeah.
And we just heard one on the BS report.
I was talking to a friend of mine who was talking about this, and I'm in my 40s, and I just said, when we were talking about this, I said, when you get older, when you get into the 40s, like, and you're starting to date or anything like that, it's messy. I think the older you get, families get messier and more, as you say, wrinkled. So it's
wrinkled. Yeah, wrinkle. A wrinkle.
I like that.
Wrinkle, not necessarily a bad wrinkle.
No,
Matthew Berry, try not to work too hard over the next couple weeks. I look forward to reading you. We will talk to you at some point in the first 3 weeks. Usually we do another one of these when some breakout guys have happened.
I appreciate that, Bill. Can I pimp a couple things? Can I promote a few things here before we go?
I forgot that you had to pimp some stuff. Go ahead.
Yes, you know me. Come on.
Yeah.
So all right, 3 things. I'll pimp 3 things. And not including obviously the fantasy podcast we do every day. So 3 quick things. First off, the ESPN Fantasy mobile app is fantastic. It's free. Everything you need to do on your league you can do with the mobile app. Start a league, draft your league, all your roster moves. They redid the app this year, and they just did a great job with it. So download it. It's free. Second thing, my book, Fantasy Life, out now in paperback. 3 new chapters, Bill. So if you waited on the book, it's now cheaper and there's more of it. So FantasyLifeTheBook.com for more information about that. And third, all this stuff we're talking about, these rankings and cheat sheets and auction strategies, everything like that. I own a website called rotopass.com. And it is, what I did is I stole something from the cable company, right? I bundled together all the best fantasy football premium websites out there. So it's like customized ranks, draft software, text alerts for your players, everything like that. So it's ESPN Insider, it's Football Guys, it's RotoWire, it's Pro Football Focus. I know you like them. It's a site that you never heard of called RotoViz, which is great with all their apps. They have a bunch of apps that help you see different things. So it's a ton of great sites. It's like 60% off of what it would cost you to buy them all separately. So I bundle them together, so it's dirt cheap, and it's one of those things that if you are an elite player, if you want to truly crush your league and dominate it, like the tools are all there. Whatever kind of league you play in, like if you have an auction league, you could put in your values and you get customized auction values and everything like that. So, and I will do this for your listeners, Bill. If you enter the promo code 90210, you will get 10% off the current price.
It's been 5 years since our 90210 podcast.
You know what? And it's interesting. I do a bunch of, during football season, especially in July and August, I do, these fantasy football chalk talks, and I go out and meet audiences and, answer questions and we're on the book tour. And I would say at least once a book tour, somebody comes up to me and says, hey, I love the 90210 podcast you did with Bill.
I should put that on YouTube.
It's really amazing 5 years later that people still talk about that. But
because I think one of the audio files disappeared, but we should put that on YouTube so it can live on forever and ever and ever.
Absolutely. Get that on the Grantland channel there.
Yeah, we'll put it on.
I always say, I believe other than the one that you did with Obama, right, it's the most downloaded episode of the BS Report.
It's got to be up there. People love 90210. It certainly had the highest number of female listeners. I can tell you that much. So, it was good for that demo. And I know our Grantland's own Juliet Littman, became her Bible for about 6 months. Matthew Berry, thank you. Good luck in your 8 leagues, and we'll talk to you during the season.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you for listening to Grantland. To hear more Grantland shows in your earballs, subscribe to Grantland Sports and Grantland Pop Culture on iTunes. Or go to grantland.com and click on podcasts.
what you got there, Golick?
The new Subway Chipotle chicken melt with guacamole.
Man, that looks good.
Yeah, this new guac is really bringing the flavor.
Got one for me too, right?
Well, yes and no. Mostly no. Well, really, all no.
Try the irresistible new Subway Chipotle chicken melt with guacamole, juicy grilled chicken strips with Monterey cheddar, Chipotle Southwest sauce, and new guacamole made from ripe Hass avocados with just a hint of jalapeno. Subway, eat fresh.